You check the app on an ordinary Thursday, waiting for your coffee to finish brewing. The number has 7 digits. You stare at it for a second. You expected something. A rush, a moment you'd remember. Instead, you just stand there in your kitchen. Coffee finally ready, feeling nothing you can quite name. You pour the coffee. You go to work like it's any other Thursday. Rewind. $100. You are 22. You open a brokerage account on your phone during a lunch break, mostly out of boredom and a vague sense that you should be doing something with money instead of nothing. You buy $100 of a broad market index fund because a video you half watched said that's what smart people do. You don't fully understand what you bought. You just know it's supposed to go up over a long time, and you have a long time. Your roommate asks what you're looking at. You say you just put some money in the market. He asks how much. You say $100, feeling a little embarrassed by how small it sounds out loud. He laughs, not meanly, and says, "That's not even going to buy you a pizza's worth of stock in anything real." You don't have a comeback. You just nod and put your phone away. $100 doesn't feel like the beginning of anything. It just feels like $100 you can't spend on something more fun this weekend. $400, 2 months in. You set up an automatic transfer of $100 a month, so you stop having to decide to do it every time. Your roommate Kevin starts a fantasy football league and spends $60 on entry fees the same week you make your second contribution. He asks if you want in. You say you're good, half thinking about the $60 sitting in your fund instead. He shrugs and says, "Suit yourself," a little confused why you'd rather watch a number on an app than watch football with everyone else. You don't have a way to explain it that doesn't sound strange out loud, so you don't try. $1,000, 8 months in. You've been adding $100 a month, mostly on autopilot, barely thinking about it. The market dips 1 week and your $1,000 becomes $920. You open the app 4 times that day, watching the numbers shrink a little more each time. Your coworker Dylan mentions he made $600 in a week on a stock some guy on the internet was hyping. You ask him what the stock actually does. He says he's not totally sure, but the chart looked good. You go home that night and almost move your money out of the index fund into whatever Dylan is buying. You sit with your finger over the transfer button for a long time. You don't press it. You don't have a great reason not to. You just don't. Nobody congratulates you for not pressing a button. That was starting to be the point. $4,500, you are 23. You get your first real raise and bump your monthly contribution from $100 to $300 without telling anyone. Dylan's stock from 6 months ago is down 40%. He doesn't bring it up anymore. You don't bring it up either. You just quietly keep buying the same boring fund every month on the same day, whether the market is up or down. Your sister asks if you're doing anything fun with your paycheck now that you got the raise. You say you're saving some of it. She says that's smart, in the tone people use when they mean boring but are being polite about it. You let boring stand. Boring is easier to explain than why you're excited about a number that still isn't big enough to impress anyone. $8,200. You are 24. Dylan finds a new stock, this time a small company he swears is about to get bought out by a bigger one. He puts in $2,000, most of what he saved that year. He tells you at lunch, practically vibrating with excitement, and asks if you want in before it's too late. You ask what happens if the buyout doesn't happen. He says it will. Everyone online is saying it will. You say you'll pass, and he looks at you like you just turned down a winning lottery ticket out of stubbornness. 3 weeks later, the deal falls through and the stock drops 70% in a single day. Dylan doesn't mention it at lunch anymore. You don't ask. $12,000. The market drops hard over a few weeks, the kind of drop that makes the news every night. Your account loses almost $2,000 in value in a single month. You watch financial commentators on your phone using words like crash and correction and bloodbath. Dylan calls you in a panic. He says he pulled everything out, all of it, into cash before it gets worse. He asks what you're doing. You say you're not doing anything. He says that's insane. You're just going to watch it keep dropping. You say maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. You don't know, and neither does he. He hangs up sounding annoyed, like your calm is somehow an insult to his panic. That night you lie awake doing math you don't love the answer to. You don't sell. You don't have a clean, confident reason not to. You just remember one sentence from a video you watched a year ago, something about time in the market beating timing the market, and you decide to trust a sentence you can't fully defend over a feeling you can. Nobody sees the years. They only see the number. And right now, the number is smaller than it was last month, and nobody is watching that either. $28,000. You are 25. The market has recovered and then some. Dylan's cash is still sitting in a savings account earning almost nothing because he's been waiting for the right moment to get back in, and the right moment keeps not arriving. He mentions it once at a barbecue, half joking, saying he probably should have just left it alone. You don't say I told you so. You don't have to. The silence after his comment does that work on its own. You keep contributing $300 a month, then $400 once you get another small raise, treating it less like a decision and more like a bill you pay to a future version of yourself who you've never met but feel strangely loyal to. $55,000. You are 26. You max out an employer retirement match for the first time, which feels like a strange kind of adult milestone nobody throws a party for. Your friend group starts talking about buying houses, weddings, real financial milestones with photos attached. You don't have photos for a retirement account. You don't have anything to post. You just have a number in an app that only you look at, growing slowly and invisibly while everyone else's life visibly changes shape around you. Your mother asks if you're saving up for anything specific, a house maybe. You say you're just investing for later. She asks how much later. You say decades, honestly. And she gets a look on her face like you just described a plan for a planet you haven't been born on yet. $90,000, you are 27. A coworker 2 cubicles over, a guy named Marcus, who's worked there 15 years, retires. There's a small cake in the break room. Someone asks him what he's going to do now. He says nothing, mostly, and everyone laughs like it's a joke, but you can tell from his face that he means it completely. You ask him privately later how he actually pulled it off on a job that never paid that much. He says the same thing you've been quietly doing since you were 22, just for 30 years straight instead of 5. He says nobody ever asked him about it until the day he stopped needing to work, and by then it had already been decided for decades. You go back to your desk and sit with that for longer than the rest of the afternoon probably deserved. $118,000. You are 28. Dylan gets engaged and starts talking seriously about buying a house, mentioning he's been putting money into a savings account for a down payment. He asks how you're doing with all that stock stuff, still a little dismissive even now. You tell him the number, not to compete, just because he asked directly for once. He goes quiet for a second, doing math in his head you can practically watch happen on his face. He says he didn't realize it had gotten that big. You say neither did you most days, since you never really look at it except to add more. $150,000, you are 29. The market drops again, a different crash this time, a different set of scary words on the news. You've been through this enough times now that your hands don't shake over the app the way they used to. Dylan texts you, not in a panic this time, just a question. He asks if you're still just doing the same boring thing. You say yeah. He says he wishes he'd never sold all those years ago, that he'd be way further ahead if he'd just left it alone like you did. You don't rub it in. You just say it's hard to know that in the moment, which is truth, and also the kindest thing you can offer someone who's still catching up to a decision you made when you were 22 and didn't fully understand. $190,000. You are 30. Your father, who spent 30 years distrusting the stock market after watching his own father lose money and won, asks to see your account out of pure curiosity the first time he's ever asked. You show him the number. He stares at it for a long moment, quiet in a way you've never seen from him. He says he always assumed people who did well with investing were either lucky or already rich to begin with. You tell him neither, just early and consistent, and not particularly smart about any single decision. He doesn't fully believe you, but he stops making jokes about the stock market after that conversation. $310,000. You are 31. You get a phone call from your bank about your account. Someone from the private client team wants to talk to you about wealth management services. You almost laugh because you don't feel like the kind of person that phrase is usually said to. You take the meeting anyway, out of curiosity more than need. The advisor asks how long you've been investing. You say 9 years. He asks what your strategy has been. You say the same $100, then more every month into the same boring fund without really touching it. He nods slowly. The way people nod at something they've heard is smart, but rarely see anyone actually stick with. $480,000. You are 33. Your sister, the same one who once called your savings smart in a tone that meant boring, asks you for advice. She says she wants to start investing but doesn't know where to begin. You tell her the truth, that there isn't really a secret, that the whole thing is mostly just showing up every month for a very long time and not panicking when it gets scary. She looks a little disappointed, like she was hoping for something more complicated, something that would explain why she hasn't started yet. You tell her the boring answer is the real one. She starts anyway with $100, the same number you started with 11 years earlier. $620,000, you are 34. Dylan mentions, almost sheepishly, that he finally opened an index fund of his own last year. He says he wishes he'd done it back when you did. You ask what changed his mind. He says watching you never seemed stressed about any of it. Year after year, crash after crash, eventually made the boring version look less boring and more like the only thing that actually worked. Nobody sees the years. They only see the number, and eventually the number becomes the only thing anyone remembers to ask about. $850,000. You are 36. You do the math one night almost by accident, checking your combined accounts for an unrelated reason, and realize you're closer to $1 million than you thought. You don't tell anyone. You've learned by now that the number means very little to people who haven't lived the 14 years it took to get there. You just close the app and go to bed, the way you've closed it 1,000 times before, whether the number was up or down that day. The midpoint. 15 years in, Marcus, the retired coworker, runs into you at a coffee shop. He asks how the boring plan is going. You tell him honestly that it's almost there, almost 7 figures, and you still don't quite believe it when you say it out loud. He says that's the part nobody warns you about, that it never feels as big as the number looks on paper, because you were there for every single unremarkable Tuesday it took to build it. He says the number is real, but so were all those Tuesdays, and people only ever want to talk about the number. You go home and sit with that sentence longer than you expect to. The return. You think back to that ordinary Thursday, coffee brewing, the number on the screen finally carrying 7 digits. You expected the feeling to arrive the moment it crossed the line. It didn't. It arrived earlier, actually, in fragments scattered across 15 years of unremarkable Tuesdays. It arrived the night you didn't press the transfer button. It arrived in the silence after Dylan's barbecue confession. It arrived in a conversation with a retired man in a break room who nobody else thought to ask. It arrived in your father's quiet stare at a number he didn't expect to see. The million was never the real finish line. It was just the paperwork. The real thing was built in the dark, one boring $100 deposit at a time, completely unnoticed until it wasn't. The cost was never really the money you didn't spend. It was the years of being quietly underestimated by people who loved you and simply had no way to see what patience actually looked like from the inside. It was the barbecues where you said nothing. It was the crashes where your hands eventually stopped shaking. It was watching other people's lives visibly change shape while yours just kept compounding invisibly underneath everything else. Nobody claps for the year you didn't sell. Nobody throws a party for the decade you kept contributing the same boring amount on the same boring day, whether the market loved you or hated you that month. You did it anyway, quietly, for 15 years, with nobody watching. That was always the price, and nobody tells you that going in. Somewhere right now, someone is opening a brokerage account on their phone during a lunch break, putting in $100 they can't fully justify, getting laughed at by a roommate for how small it sounds out loud. They are about to watch that number shrink before it ever grows. They don't know yet that the ones who make it aren't smarter or luckier or better at picking stocks. They're just still pressing buy on the same boring Tuesday 15 years from now when it would be completely reasonable to have stopped. You know that part now. They don't. Not yet.